Technically, it started as long as we can get everyone ready to. So I'll give it like I'll just wait until I don't know when Amos will be able to like get his stuff fixed, but I say we start already.
Yeah, I'd recommend that because like I said, I've got a date tonight, so yeah.
Good luck on your date, man.
Oh, he's gone again.
No.
No, he's back again.
Surprise!
Yo.
Can you hear us?
Probably not, but anyway, we'll start anytime. I'm ready. Anytime you all are.
Yep.
Well, I mean, it was Nate who came up with the topic, right? He wanted to talk about it.
Yeah, what was it? What do you mean by iceberg? Is it just...
Okay, here,
it's basically whenever you create a good amount of content for your world, but you get so lost in it to the point where your story itself barely gets written, and then it's more like you have all these pages of lore, but barely any of it reaches the final pages of your work.
I thought it was something else.
Okay, I think I get it.
No, yeah, you pretty much not hit the nail on the head. It's funny because it was a while ago. I remember mentioning this. Like, I'm gonna talk about this. I was just when he brought up this more earlier. I was like, yeah, Iceberg, but what for again? I don't remember. I was like, yes, Iceberg are like research and like world building and like how much of it actually goes onto the page and how you can get lost in the source and stuff. So yeah. I'm not sure you guys noticed. I kind of came offline for like a sec. So
we noticed.
We saw that.
Yeah, but cool. We could say since you're back now, I don't know. I'm acting as host because I'm guiding the conversation. But really, Nate, since you're the one who brought up the topic, I'd say like you can kind of explain the whole concept of world building Iceberg, and we can take off the conversation from there.
Okay. I kind of did already a bit, but I guess we get a little deeper into it is, so like say you got your story world, and like say you're doing like world building for like a nation or a certain place and that stuff. After you start thinking, okay, well, this nation's got this much people, X amount of people, and I was thinking, okay, well, then for that they'll need to have like farms. I don't know, just you start going to like deep into like stuff like I don't know, like the culture, the farm, like how farming. Also, you start thinking about like there's a certain point where it's like, okay, yeah, you get down certain things where it's like, okay, like the resources, the people, the farm, and all that stuff. But after you can get to a point where you're like, okay, you reach a point where you have stuff like, okay, these people they make 40% of the sweet corn in the world. It's like, okay, that's great, but is that going to be relevant for the story? Where's that going? You know what I mean? And my thought on it is like, yeah, it's good to know. You got to know more than what the readers are going to read. So that's a given. But there is a limit. I think there's like got to be aware of not going too deep in the rabbit hole of actually, like you don't have to go that deep, if you know what I mean. Like you're gonna have to know more than the reader, but at the same time, you don't have to go like as deep as like I guess what a real world would have in their world, so to speak. You just gotta have mainly enough for you to know where how things work, and then you got up from there, show enough to actually get the story, get your main story across to the readers, if that makes sense. So I think that was kind of like my take on it, but I don't know. Like I think, yeah. So I think my main thoughts was like, how do you guys, I guess, tackle that, or how do you guys like deal with like I guess the research side of things, and then what do you put into your story, and like how does that work out for you guys?
Okay. Should okay? Shall I go next?
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, wait. Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. That was a very bad transition. Yeah, I definitely see what you mean. Like, I do think like lore is very important. Like to make a world feel very real and lived in. So but you can't. But I think because I remember because obviously I know Lord of the Rings, the original books, is basically I will absolutely confess firsthand I haven't read them. I do know my brother has read them, and he says they're quite hard to read because it's pages and pages upon basically describing history of a tree. And that was the reason why I think Lord of the Rings was originally deemed to be a book that was considered unadaptable for film or television.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
and the way Percy Jackson, and I think that's a good case study because the Lord of the Rings trilogy is among one of my favorite films of all time, and it basically condenses a lot of the lore into basically just the background art, and then just has the story front and center. So I think you can out of my I think of most recent example I have is going through Dune. I'd say that that gets good points of lore across, but I don't feel completely lost. I know generally what's going on. I'm still sort of at the beginning. They're still setting up on Arrakis, but I know just enough to know what the situation on Arrakis is and the Atreus families and the Harkonians. I know it. I know there's way more below the surface, but for the purpose of where I am, I know enough to know what's going on.
Yeah.
I think, and then there's Wheel of Time, which is a book I've kind of given up on. It is because it's just so dense with
it does
a lot of detail that I think you can get rid of and have a bit more of and I can understand more of what's going on or who these people are. Sorry for people who don't like who like Wheel of Time, but I'm struggling to get through even the beginning.
Nah, that's totally fair. It's actually interesting because I haven't read Lord of the Rings, but I do know Wheel of Time is kind of it was kind of in between after the Lord of the Rings, heavily inspired by Lord of the Rings, especially the first 3 books, and then it kind of before Game of Thrones, or Song of Ice and Fire books really became a thing. So it's kind of between the generations of Tolkien and then the modern era, sort of how fantasy's kind of dealt with modern era. And you're I can see why as much as I love Wheel of Time, I honestly, if I was to especially if I sit down and read it, I doubt I would have got through that much of it. Because as much as the world building is really great and the way he explains stuff is really it really does help flesh out the world, because there's a lot of nations and factions and stuff, so it works in that sense, and so there's a lot to remember, so him explaining stuff quite a bit is helpful. But if you're marathoning it or going through or reading it and you just haven't been fully invested, it's rough. And then what makes it more interesting about Wheel of Time is the last 3 books books were done by Brandon Sanderson, and he was really heavily inspired by Wheel of Time and these previous books, but his writing style kind of it fits really well, but at the same time it's I felt that meandering sort of style kind of left, and it just worked just fine. It's really interesting. So it's a good point.
So my feelings as far as lore within books or within any medium is that I feel as though if you want to go about having a story that is efficient and as well as gets through its plot points in a manner that is not only just digestible but satisfying for your viewers, you have to make sure that the lore that comes up is relevant for the moment in which we need to talk about it. We can talk about the fact that a certain part of the planet might have these ice giants running around, right? We may have some ice giants running around. We may have a giant forge somewhere, or there's some ancient capital underwater, and only so few people have actually been able to go there via some advanced magic. All of that, it's really interesting stuff when you lay it all out. But the trouble is, we can get so lost in the weeds in creating all of these dynamic scenarios and these fantastical locations that what eventually happens when we actually get to our books? Do we actually talk about any of them? Are they actually relevant to what's going on? Probably not, but that's not me telling you that you shouldn't do it, because quite frankly, like Nate mentioned earlier, you as a writer, you do need to know your world a hell of a lot better than your readers do. And the idea is to break them into understanding your world in an efficient manner. It's like you can mention the fact that you have a land of ice giants somewhere directly within your text, but is that ice giant location relevant to the actual conflict at the moment? And if so, how is it important? Like I feel lore on top of giving your world life is also a promise. I feel it should be a promise of, hey, if you stick around long enough, you might just see this crazy place that our characters are talking about. Like it might just come across as, oh, you're kind of foreshadowing it, but it's more like if you stick with us long enough, you just might see it. But the idea is, if you're going to be playing around with a lot of lore and you're going to be like Tolkien, you talk about the historical aspect of the world, which again, I myself have not read the Lord of the Rings books. I have not, but if there's one thing that I do appreciate about them on a conceptual level based on what I've been told, is that Tolkien does go out of his way to tell you not even out of his way, I feel it's fundamentally part of his style from what I know. He really wants to engross you in how the history of this world functions and how we've gotten here, where we're potentially going. For some people, that might be a little too much, and it might contradict what I've mentioned earlier. But there is a way in which you can make that work. Because the thing is, like I said, lore should be a promise of not necessarily just quality by itself, but you being able to understand how what you've been told within these various history lessons, these segments, these little one-off characters, these one-off conversations that characters are having, how is that going to come up in the middle of all of the action, you know? Like, you might find yourself having a manuscript of over 50,000 words of various lore that you're probably never going to have introduced within your book. And if that's the case, and you're not necessarily writing, I feel that's when that's when the real problem starts. When you have all of these pages of lore, and believe me, I had a friend in high school who had this problem. She had like books upon books of the stuff, and the book itself that she wanted to write never got off the ground because of it. Yeah, so it's like incorporate as much as you can, but incorporate what should work with that promise of, hey, you stick around long enough, this is like I am definitely going to be dropping this here, and if you paid attention long enough, then I guarantee you this is probably going to be pretty hella satisfying.
All right, so that's actually interesting. You mentioned like how like you had a person who was like absorbed with the lore before they even wrote their story. And I actually had like,
right.
I feel like there's when you have like writer groups, there's always going to be that one person who is obsessed with the lore before they even have started writing. I've had that experience as well. Like I've known a couple of people, but regardless, I think I wanted to like add a bit of a spice in this conversation because before we even started this topic, my interpretation of the world building iceberg was completely different from what is the actual meaning that Nate wanted to talk about. But I'll bring it up anyways. I think like this is probably a very amateur take, but I don't know. I've been writing for a long time, and I've experienced different mediums of stories. So, regardless, it adds an interesting topic to this discussion. But I think it's just as important to hold back than as it is to tell about whatever that you're, the world. I think it's just as important. I don't know. I take a lot of inspiration from horror related stories a lot, whether it's from movies and stuff. But I think even in horror, you can easily apply that to a normal fantasy story where it's like happy go lucky because sometimes in a horror story, obviously there's you don't want to the the horror comes from the mystery majority of the time. Like you know, you always fear what you don't understand. You know, a very famous quote.
Yeah,
Everyone knows that. Lovecraft,
yeah.
Batman even says it.
Fear of the unknown.
but yeah, you know, fear of the unknown. So it's obviously it's always good that even in a very lore heavy horror story, it's always nice to hold back information and let the user's imagination kind of run wild. And the same applies in a normal fantasy story or a sci-fi story. Sometimes keeping it vague lets people fill it in with their own ideas and makes it interesting. And I also think like sometimes you don't, what is it? You don't need to prove, or you don't need to write a full-on script of lore for your story, but you can to make your story feel alive. That is, you know, you don't have to have a big world-building script, but you can make it so that it's believable enough to that it feels like there's so much lore to the world. You know, that it ties again to the whole vagueness. If the I genuinely think Oda, despite how amazing of a writer he is, I really do think that a lot of his world building, he purposely kept it vague for himself to allow himself to build upon it later as he wrote the story.
Right.
That's my
Wiggle
take.
room.
good example.
But
Definitely,
yeah.
definitely like for my law. Well, the way I've structured my story is I've used Oda as one of my inspirations and know when to
definitely
put something in
Mm.
and then when to reveal it.
Yeah.
That really works if you're mad enough to extend it to a very long length.
And also it just leaves you breathing space for like discovery writing, even though you probably, especially like if you know where you want to end things or you have a decent plan anyways, then it just leaves you more freedom to like discover, right, or even kind of like see how people are taking certain parts. Especially, I guess I can't speak for how Oda does his things, but I did hear some stuff about him like saying when he realized someone has like an idea of what's going on, he likes to try to find like another way of doing things, which kind of I'm not sure how 100% thing that is, but I just, you know, how the man, you know, he does like chapter by chapter, like he's probably like a few chapters ahead of what we actually get. So it's within the cards that you can do stuff like that. And I imagine that like him, how he does his world building leaves him free to kind of like answer different questions at later points in more flexibly than if he were to give you like all the answers straight up. Yeah. And Hex, is there anything more you was gonna say, or should I jump in next?
I can continue, or I'll right now. I think I said what I wanted to say, so I'll let whoever's going next go further.
Okay, yeah. I mean, to be fair, I think you kind of said a bunch of what I was gonna say. To be honest, like I was gonna say literally, that just, you know, the fact of, you know, not showing everything to the reader leaves them to actually kind of imagine certain like how deep it's going to be. Like if you just give them enough like tools and stuff for them to think, oh damn, okay, this is here, this can go here and here and here and here. They can like readers can take things probably deeper than you could even really fathom or do in your own time. So again, like there is that like thing of like the iceberg. That's like one of the biggest reasons I mentioned it in that way, is because like you can essentially write a story where you give the readers, like you tell the narrative and that stuff, but you give the readers just enough tools for them to kind of think, oh, okay, you mentioned this here, that implies this and this and this and this and this. And if it implies all these things, then this world is really deep. But in reality, the writers probably just knows maybe this, and this, and maybe not like the other 5 other things that the reader has predicted or implied this, you know, the story is telling them this world has. Like maybe will be there if the writer had to write something about it, but because it's not part of the story they're telling, they never had to go that deep. But they left enough tools for the reader to kind of like let their imagination flow in that direction, wherever that direction might be. So yeah, pretty much what you were saying. So yeah, it's just good.
Yeah, like I'm definitely a fan of the idea of you leave things just vague enough for your readers to kind of wander. And like you mentioned with the horror example, Hex, I feel this applies more towards the mystical side of things, especially if you're doing more of the fantasy side of the conversation. You see, the one thing about magic, the esoteric, or just, the unknown in general, is that you want to make sure that that semblance of the unknown still remains. Like, we have an idea of how magic works and functions, but we may not necessarily know the other aspects behind it. That's why whenever you'll watch a couple videos from a certain person who reviews comics, he goes, "It's magic. I don't have to explain any of it." He's not wrong about that, actually. He's not wrong about that. Because the thing is, if we could call a power that we can quantify based on constants and variables, science and numbers, could we really even call that ability magic or that phenomenon magic? I don't think you could. Now, could you? Because at that point, it's not magic. It's something that we can that we can explain using logic. However, if it's not something that we can fully explain using logic based on context clues alone, then it stays within the realm of mysticism and esotericism, which again lends back into the side of which then leans into the vague side of things too. Now, of course, this can apply to settings too. There are some aspects of settings that we can't fully comprehend either, especially again if you're leaning towards mysticism and fantasy, or even if you want to get into the more comic booky side of things and superhero side of things too. Like, believe it or not, as ridiculous as superpowers can be, depending on who you ask, especially on the lore side of things, it still falls into the same category of there's some aspects that we're not really meant to understand. These things just kind of happen, and trying to get a blanket explanation for all of that, believe it or not, does more harm than good. There's a reason why a lot of people railed against season 2 of The Legend of Korra, and it wasn't just because of Korra's behavior in season 2. Like, my thing is that I came to peace with that. My problem with Legend of Korra season 2 is that they felt the need to explain the origins behind everything. We didn't need to do that. We didn't have to. When you need to explain the magic and the mysticism behind something, you fundamentally weaken what it's meant to represent in your viewer's head. You can't automatically please everyone. You can't do it, and I don't think you should try either. Which is another reason why you shouldn't even bother to explain the magic, because some of the fun behind that is the theory crafting.
Yeah.
Like, as much as I might not necessarily jump on the theory community, mainly because I've just left that community a long time ago, I still feel it fundamentally serves a purpose of, if some people are willing to make theories of your work, going into aspects that you may not necessarily go into yourself, to go into the esoteric on their own time, I feel that's proof that you're doing something right. If people are willing to sit down and make theories, let them. But if you get to the point where you need to answer every single theory that anyone has ever had, you're gonna find that a lot of that inherent mystery, vagueness, and mysticism is just gonna go right out the window.
Yeah.
All right. Can you guys hear me?
Hey, what's up?
Oh,
Hold up.
Cool.
Good to see you, man.
Oh, okay. So, I kind of joined the discussion late. So, what are we talking about?
Talk about like the iceberg idea of like with world building, where you don't necessarily need to show the reader like every little detail of how your world works. You just need to give them kind of enough tools and enough information for them to kind of like understand the narrative. And if you do your job right,
the world is alive.
If you do your job right, they will kind of fill in the blanks and they'll see the world deeper than what's really on the page. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Course,
okay.
There is a flip side to this that I will bring up in a bit. There's a flip side to the argument that I got to bring up. I think we all know what it is.
Oh yeah. But I guess I can add my 2 cents to that. I think
hold up.
About world building.
Sorry. I'm just gonna say you could go ahead, but it's Lester afterwards, and I'm just saying whenever you want to talk,
Don't worry. You can go first.
No, it's not that. I'm just saying. Be sure to like write in the chat that you want to go next whenever you want to go next, so that we don't interrupt each other.
Right.
That's all I wanted to say. But go ahead. No.
Oh, I can go.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Yeah, go for it.
Cool. I guess like my opinion on the whole world building aspect, I think what's like most important is not just, I like you guys said before, having to explain every single intricate detail of your world. Like I think that can only really work if your world itself isn't, very similar to the world that we live in. Like for example, from my writing, I once like made a lot of mistakes where I got so in depth with the lore of the characters that it ended up being like there was no mystery left to figure out about, who the character was and where they came from. So when it came to my own world building, I mostly focused on sort of real world events, but just formed them into a way where it would make sense in the world that the story is currently being told in. So yeah, I do agree that, with world building, it's always best to leave a little bit of mystery to, what's being said. Yeah, that's all I got to say for that.
That's fair.
Yeah. So yeah, like I would actually agree. I really do. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my train of thought back.
That's fine.
But yeah, I'd say having like, because like anyone who's done world building would know that making it coherent is also a challenge in itself, and this is it's sort of the importance. Like anyone who can like sit down and write out their entire lore in a book, I have nothing but mad respect for you. So my because my strategy is I will confess I mostly come up with a lot of it as I go along, and
that's not a problem either, honestly.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I think like
I do it all the time.
Work, I do think there's an element that he has like a full plotted out storyline, but
kind of does both.
Up in the future that he thinks like, okay, maybe I can like, okay, yeah, maybe that can tie into that. Okay, maybe I can do something like that. It's something known as I think it's called retroactive phrasing. So nothing wrong with that, and I think Oda does do it really well. So I think a good example is I think the Fishman Pirates. So when they were first introduced, it was Johnny who was explaining this.
We can hear some background sounds. I don't know where it's coming from.
Sorry. Hello? Can people hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
We're A-okay.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So So I was going on the Fishman. So it was after the Sanji was recruited when they were going to save Nami that the guy they were traveling with, Johnny, sort of told them a bit about the Fishman Pirates and how and basically of this terrorizing figure called Jinbei, who's basically allowed the fishermen to sort of go off and like raid the East Blue. And it's not until like, and you get to like learn like Arlog as nothing but an unforgivable bastard. It's until you get to Sabaody Archipelago that you learn that you see the opposite end of it, and you notice, okay, maybe you see the reason why he hated them so much. When the crew ran into Hachi again, and then that sort of culminates in when Sanji confronts Jinbei about what Johnny had told them, and then Jinbei not only apologized to Nami but also told basically what happened, the story of Fisher Tiger, and how he could have stopped what happened to a village by killing Arlong after he got out of Impel Down, but he just couldn't do it, and it was a guilt he had afterwards. So I think, and just when I sort of word it like that, it definitely feels like he definitely like reframed a lot of what what happened in the past with what happened to the future. And yeah, I think like it's very like it's challenging to do world building. It's a lot of fun, and there's always like, especially if you're still trying to work it out as you go along, just always make sure you have like a like this is my sort of advice. Always have some sort of coherent plan.
Yeah.
And then you can sort of change or reframe certain aspects in order to fit in with your lore.
Yeah, I think kind of like have your kind of a skeleton there.
Yeah, exactly. Like I always,
you kind of
strip,
you kind of layer on a bits of meat as you.
Yeah, it's something I always. It's a advice I always give to anyone writing. Always like have your story in sort of in your head as sort of like bullet points, even if you have to write it out, and then write sort of write up to each point, and by the time you get to them, it could be completely different.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. True. Actually, that was the one about the bullet points is such a good advice. And it's actually the advice that that's exactly what I'm trying to do with my current story. I'm trying to like, it's even in bullet points, it's super difficult to like come up with like a world building for it. In my opinion, but I'd say it's efficient. Yeah.
Yeah, it's efficient. Like I personally like because everyone writes in different ways, and I've sort of learned firsthand, like especially like with my earlier stuff of just how poor I was to begin with at world building. Like, so it's sort of it's my current world. It's in my current arc and my other two stories that I've sort of written where I feel like I finally got to grips with how to do world building. And I see like the first world I made as probably my weakest, which is what I'm basically trying to change through my rewrite and then retroactively reframing things.
Yeah. Yeah, so I just want to like add in I just want to add in like I like stories well I mean I also love stories where there's a lot of in-depth lore, but there's one story that comes to mind which is called Blame, if you know about that, or
absolutely.
the manga.
I've seen the film, I haven't read the manga.
The manga is so good. I have not finished it completely, but I've went pretty far in the manga. But in my opinion, it's super. The way the lore or the world building is handled is super smart. I often would listen to a lot of like analysis on Blame, and there was like PewDiePie, who I'm sure everyone knows PewDiePie, but it's that Blame is his favorite manga, and that's how I learned about the manga as well. I learned it from him, but he always said like that the way the lore of the manga or how the storytelling is handled is that the author is very vague in what it is very vague in general with the story. He doesn't give a lot of dialogue, and therefore it leaves a lot of blanks for you as the reader to fill. And it always feels like that you are co-writing with the author the story, and it feels like if anyone who reads the story will always have their own interpretation of that story, which I always thought was super interesting. And I always I think that was like when I thought of that, and then I looked back in Blame and started reading through it, I always thought like I want to be able to replicate it, even if it's minor. I want to replicate that type of experience in my own works of like kind of I'm leaving it vague, but also letting the reader fill in the blanks and come up with their own conclusions. Yeah, that's all I wanted to give given this take.
Okay, yeah. I imagine that would be like a bit of a balancing act, isn't it? Like you kind of, like saying it's kind of, you need to give them just enough information to kind of let them imagination go wild, but like not too vague to the point where they just don't understand what you've been trying to tell them. So it's just kind of like striking that balance, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I feel the flip side can scarily apply at the same time though. It's like we want to make sure that we keep things, clear and open enough for someone here that's reading along to kind of form their own opinion, form their own, idea. Like, because that's going to happen no matter what you do. People are always going to have ideas and theories as to where you're going to go. But of course, then then the scary question of how do I fulfill these expectations, or how do I go about this without insulting the reader at the same time? It's like we definitely do want to keep a semblance of of breadcrumbing along the way, but then what happens when the breadcrumbs that we leave behind end up bringing the reader over to a cliff, and not the kind of cliff that they want to fall over. Like, people don't mind falling down a rabbit hole or a cliff of just, man, that is freaking awesome. But when you find out what's at the bottom of that hill is nothing more than disappointment, it's not even just a complete and consistent drop of, or not even a consistent drop, just a drop that just keeps spooking them and shocking them every step of the way. Like, there has to be a solid foundation along the way just the same. You got to make sure that while you are leaving things purposely vague, you still want to make sure that at the end of the day, like James mentioned, you do have a good set of bullet points for what you need to do. Of course, I'm a discovery writer myself, so a lot of the stuff that I do tends to really just come along the way. I have sat down and planned my lore out to an absorbent amount, but every now and again, when you end up writing, you're gonna find yourself going in a different direction one way or another. You might not have intended it, but 9 times out of 10, what you might find is that it may just work well within your lore, and it's just a matter of trying to make sure that it fits in there without either one, betraying the expectations of your viewer, which goes into the whole Star Wars The Last Jedi fiasco, which I feel is a marketed point. It's a fine bullet point for what happens with expectations. It may not necessarily be associated with lore by itself. Some parts of it definitely are, especially with how some parts of that movie may or may not have contradicted some lore. But at the end of the day, lore and expectations are, in my opinion, fundamentally linked together with overall satisfaction of a story. If you go so far off the beaten path as to what somebody may expect, you might find that you might get some people angry no matter what you do. That's not to say that you always have to play within your reader's expectations. You don't necessarily have to, because if people were doing that, they would put your book down. At that point, you don't have anything to surprise them with.
Yeah.
However, though, at the same time, you have to maintain that very fine balance of, I need to do this in a way in which I don't piss this person off.
Yeah, exactly. I think that kind of goes back to just knowing yourself and what you would like and what would you find awesome, and then just kind of just going on that hope of, well, if I like this kind of thing, I'll find people who like this kind of thing too. I think that's the best way to maybe tackle it without like losing your mind trying to strike the balance to please too many people, maybe people you don't even like the stuff you like anyways. So yeah, I don't know.
So are we just specifically talking about lore for this one, or are we also allowed to talk about characters?
Oh, we can talk about characters too.
Stuff, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because characters and lore, I feel, are kind of fundamentally tied too. Because a character has a place in lore. Like, they can be a goddess, they can be a scientist. Like, that comes to the territory.
Yeah. I think for characters, because one thing I like when I'm writing, I really like writing characters. I like writing characters and also writing the history of said character. Like, you can either be like long details, or maybe this one character could say one specific thing, like two characters that are talking, and one of them talks about, oh, remember San Francisco? And it's like you as the reader don't know what what happened in San Francisco, but the way they talk about it throughout the story, like, oh, this reminds me of San Francisco, or, oh man, it hasn't been this bad since San Francisco. And you're consistently being told about this particular thing that happened in San Francisco. And it's like, so now you're wondering what's happened in San Francisco. And I just like those little moments where the characters sort of make inside wisdom about something that went on in their world. And as we continue reading the story, we slowly unravel what that is. So, like, again, going back to characters, I really like stories that sort of dive into a character's own mental state. Like, for example, like a story that I'm writing in first person. Like, as you know, you're reading a story in first person. You're basically going through this entire story through your main character's entire mindset. So in that sense, you can't really trust what the main character is saying because they're talking from their perspective.
Yeah.
And I always found books like that interesting because you're not getting the full story of what's going on in the story. You're just getting one person's perspective of the story. But as it continues onward, you get to see and make up your own opinion and your own thoughts and your own ideas as to, what is really being said here. Like the character I'm writing for, he sort of tells the story in a very way where it's like he himself doesn't have all the answers. Like his mental state isn't all there. So you're only going by his words and not by the words of someone who is third person. And I think in writing that character, I'm sort of learning more about myself and my own mental state about certain things. And I think that's just very, very like therapeutic to, write characters because you're adding a bit of yourself into it as well.
No, 100%. Yeah, I think
definitely.
that's. I was going to say a little something, but I didn't want to step over who was meant to go next.
Oh no, no one has really specified who wants to go next yet.
Okay. Yeah.
I can go after you, Nate, if no one else minds.
No, it was just like a short comment. It's just like, literally, I think that's what you said there is kind of literally one of the things which I like about like the writing. Well, any kind of like storytelling medium in general, but especially the writing medium because you can get to someone's head. It's like, it just helps broaden your perspective on other people's perspectives, and therefore you through seeing their point of view, you kind of understand more of your point of view because you're seeing it from you're seeing their world through it. You're seeing their world. It's kind of it's skewed from your world, so therefore, and that's what I think that's a really cool part about fiction. So when you're talking about that's awesome stuff.
It's like fun because like whether or not we realize it, a lot of our own perceptions do inform what we write. We write what we know. So a lot of the times, a lot of the political nature of our lore or the history side of things, they're informed by what we see on a regular basis. So on the therapeutic side of things, absolutely, it can be cathartic to really explore a lot of your own ideas and a lot of the world's injustices through the pen. Or rather through art and everything. Like that's really the point. So that's why whenever you tend to get a lot of I don't want to call anybody stupid here, but when you have to deal with a lot of these comments that will tell you that don't inject so and so into this and that, I'm gonna be blunt. You can't decide that. That's not for you to decide. Fundamentally, as a writer and as a creator, going into anything, no matter what it is, your worldview is going to pop up in that work somewhere. It always happens. There's not a piece of fiction out there that doesn't have some semblance of someone's beliefs in there. And I'm not even just talking about politics either, because it's not that simple. Politics maybe, but other things like how you see the world, how you view the world, or maybe even how the world views you. All of that is going to bleed into what's happening here. So that's why that's why I tend to really gravitate towards stories like Final Fantasy Tactics. I gravitate towards stories of towards Tales of the Abyss, or pretty much anything, be it video game, novel, or whatever. If I find a story that's heavily political, really deals with the human spirit, among other things, you're gonna find that a lot of the lore in there really does inform a lot of that basic structure. Like I feel the definition of lore really goes beyond just how magic works or how this and that works. A lot of it can really is dedicated to a lot of how a character's role influences the world. Like this person is a goddess, so they naturally affect how the power of magic works here. Or this person is the great king, and the great king here used himself as a human seal to prevent these demons from getting out. The king is still alive, mind you. He's capable of speaking. He's capable of thinking. In fact, he knows he can feel every single moment. In fact, time isn't even linear for him. Time's not even linear for him. So what I'm getting at is the lore itself can also be informed by the character's role as well. So it can really go either from lore to character, top down, or character to lore, bottom up.
No, yeah, exactly. I think I was gonna ask a question, but I think I was just jumping off what you were saying. So, like, oh gosh, I think I lost my train of thought. Okay. I think I'll just go straight to the question. Like, where do you like when it comes to like writing, I guess, political things and stuff, which honestly I think that's another good thing about writing stories and telling and stuff, is if you're able to do it well and do it in a way that serves the story, it's a delight. But I feel that maybe I think some people, I'm not sure. I would say I can't speak for Twitter, because some people are sorry, they'll just jump on the thing so quickly without even knowing all the information, and they're just off the beaten path anyways.
It's because no one really, most people nowadays don't necessarily join a conversation to listen. They mostly join a conversation to reply. It's why that's why the philosophy that I have whenever I have to deal with anybody that I do not agree with, I at least try to let me understand how this works. Instead of coming at me with talking points that I know you have listed down on your notepad somewhere that you're ready to go off on me about, let's try to actually sit down and have a human conversation. But to be fair, this is kind of going a little off topic. On places like Twitter, it's not built for that, and people need to stop treating it like it is. People need to stop.
I always Twitter's like the worst place you can get any sort of. I know there's a bit off topic, but Twitter's not
the place
that you go for any sort of constructive conversation. I've only had one, and that was over The Last of Us Part 2 with someone who does love the game, and it was actually really, and that was a really fun interaction. But that was
that's mainly because you saw them as a person, and they in turn treated you as a person too. Like that's how we have good dialogue. We're still capable of having it. The problem, though, is when we just get so doped up into this insanity that we kind of forget the ability of how to treat one another as a person rather than just somebody behind a screen. It's kind of like the cockpit effect. Like you don't really know the other person on the other side is a human until you see them right in front of you. And considering how the internet works, that's not always viable / possible.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. I think what I was going to ask about that was, I think when it comes to like writing, I think with anything there's an extreme, but like what would you say is like one of the main things where why some stories with political messages fall flat? I feel maybe don't think I put too much thought into this right now, but I feel maybe it's partly because they've kind of put the cart before the horse. They're kind of they're writing a story just for that reason, and then it really construct the story to make it have its stand on its own legs as a story first, and then it could just come off a bit like pretentious, I suppose.
I don't know who's gonna go.
I can go after you if you want, Hex.
Yeah, sure. Then I'll go. But yeah, I guess I'll make it quick because if I'm being honest, politics. I'm not good at politics. I'm not good at politics, and I don't even know if I can handle the politics of my own story that well. That's why I don't have any intention of like writing political stuff in my story. And if it is going to be, then I'm going to need to do like a shit ton of research to execute it properly. I don't know.
Well, that sorry about that. That was just a knee jerk of me, but that really depends on what subject you're delving into. Because for me, for the past couple of years, I've been delving into race relations, fascism, dictatorships, systems of governments, and just the subject of rebellion in general. I've been digging into all of that, and what you're going to find when you go into them, fundamentally speaking, there's no clean way to go about it. It really is mostly just about how you're going to portray the message. The thing is,
Yep.
I know for a fact that yes, there's a lot of political stories out there from my side of the political aisle. That's a fact. That may not necessarily be told the best way, or they may just come across as obvious pandering, depending on who you talk to. Me personally, I try not to see it like that because my thing is, I don't feel that every single story put out by people is necessarily the result of a focus group coming into play. I don't really think that's the case. I feel what ends up happening is either a mix of one, production issues, two, creative differences, and three, everyone kind of just trying to go through a distilled version of what they were trying to tell. Or in the worst case scenarios, you can actually have actual hack writers, which to be fair they're very real. You have a lot of people who may try to be who may be trying to portray one subject, but then you get a certain movie that was supposed to be set during the Holocaust be a case of a girl going back in time just to learn a lesson, and then the movie kind of ends when she's about to get gassed, and then she goes back home and she's like, yeah, my grandma was right. I'm a terrible person. I need to understand my history. And I'm like, what the hell did I just watch?
Nah, that is goat.
Nani, what's this?
And you want to know what's even funnier about that is that that's not a joke. That movie actually exists. Don't watch it.
God.
What movie is that?
I think it's called The Devil's Arithmetic. I'll need to look it up later, but just to get back to my main point before I tear that movie a new butt. You see,
Yeah, it's called that.
oh God, why? Don't ever watch it, people. It is bad. But the thing is, I feel that the message itself, that whatever these stories are trying to tell, be it the story of race relations, history, or of an atrocity, we can't really bulk away at the message that they're trying to portray. We can mention that yes, this was written poorly, but it doesn't necessarily diminish the message that they were trying to tell. The message that they want to tell is a valid one. The problem is there's a subsection of people who've kind of forgotten to draw the distinctive line between how we view the story, how we view the message. Yeah, this is a good I understand the message that you're trying to tell. But then on the other side, it's like, you're a bumbling idiot. How could you write this? Like, who approved this? How did you get your chops? Like who approved this crap? How do you still have a job?
But yeah, what is it? Well, I was gonna say, but then you interrupt. But it's fine. I think most of it you covered, but regardless, I still say I don't know. I have not much confidence in politics, but I will say, like, if to write like a good political story, you can. What is it? I think. This is such a vague term to say, but it just needs a lot of substance. This is a very vague term to say, but I can elaborate more. I think the best Kite actually said it really well, like how the whole thing with like the girl going back in time, she learns about the Holocaust, and then she's like, "Wow, I was an idiot," and then my parents were right. It says the right message, but it even on paper. Even on paper, it doesn't. It's yeah, exactly. It sounds like a lecture. It has no substance in it. I think like any political story can be well written with like a lot of. It's so hard to describe substance, like what I mean by that. But in general, it just means like.
I think I know what you mean. Like I don't know. I'll let you finish, but I have something which I kind of related to this, which I think might be able to be more accurate to.
Right. Actually, I'm sorry to cut off, but I want to mention this. We may also need to define what makes a political story too. Just because that word gets thrown around a lot, and no one really defines what it's supposed to mean in context. So just want to throw that out just to stay safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hex, because I think.
Well,
I mean, I'm not sure because I guess it's.
Ironically, I feel like I am out of words.
Sorry, my friend.
No, it's actually hard to describe substance. It's it's a hard, maybe, yeah, exactly. It's a hard thing to describe, but it's just like I feel like maybe Django is probably a good movie as a reference, because I feel like Django is probably in recent memory, it's probably the best kind of like anti-slavery, Black Rights Matter type of film that I've ever seen. It actually like I don't know. There's something very empowering about the film, and very motivating. And that's the thing. It has a lot of substance in it, and it's super respectful, in a way.
Yeah.
Without it tells a message without trying to pander or lecture you. It's very respectful to the to the history and to what is to the message that it's trying to portray. I mean, not purvey. What the heck kind of word is that?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, you're right. It is.
No, you're onto something.
I think that's like an
Yeah.
important thing. So my general like politics is something I generally avoid like the plague because it's because you especially if you go to places like Twitter, it's the worst place you could ever go to get any sort of discussions. But I think like with this idea of like especially like films that say that like I think the worst thing you could ever do if you're trying to do a political anything, in my case, like my main hobby is gaming, so like when when in an interview someone says this is going to be like a very political game, I was thinking, no, don't say that, because usually that means no, it isn't, because someone would. No, it isn't. Or it's sort of just kind of it shows the message, but then doesn't do anything about it. I think there's a.
I think I don't even.
Yeah, I think like so. One of my favorite games would be BioShock Infinite. I think that's a really good example of like how to do political commentary. I mean, all accounts, it is absolutely ridiculous. It is generally quite ridiculous, but it's the way it portrays particularly like white supremacist, like American white supremacist as sort of the main driving factor of like the city of Columbia, but it isn't like full in the forefront. It's sort of pushed in the background of the society, and
which ironically I think hurts the game more than it helps.
Yeah, I certainly would not say it's a perfect game by any stretch, especially like the latter half. But I think that's probably the best example I can think. The other one I can think of is the Wolfenstein, the machine game Wolfenstein games. Again, like completely ridiculous. But the way it sort of grounds like the Nazis you're fighting. The way it grounds them is basically okay. You hate these people because they're completely against your political views. But to them, it's their society. Like to them, it's completely normal. I think that's how you sort of. And I think it's a very respectable to its like sort of political message. And again, like Wolfenstein is absolutely ridiculous. You basically play a character that has a higher body count than Rambo, but it's at the same time it sort of finds a way to sort of ground its own ridiculousness in something that feels a bit more open. So like even like some of the antagonists, like I think best example is Frau Engel who was like introduced in the first like machine game, and then the primary antagonist for the second. The way they portray her, and the way they make you hate her, isn't because like she's part of like the political agenda you disagree with. It's because she is not only completely terrifying, but also a complete psychopath, especially in the second game. Anyway, Yeah, as I said, politics is something I generally like avoid. Because it's not something I want to engage with. And
who's next? Sorry.
I think Asmos than me. But...
Okay. I'll go after you, Nate. I want to try and define the politics thing real quick.
Yeah, I'm pretty much done with politics, so.
Yeah, well, yeah, I get it, but I just gotta make sure that I define it because I feel sometimes we get a little lost in the weeds on what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
So, we'll go from there.
Wait, who's next?
You next, Asmos.
Oh, you said it's Amos. I'm sorry.
Amos, sorry.
It's okay. I've been saying it Amos because of the expanse. So yeah.
And I'm also, I'm from the UK, so that's.
I'm
English. Cool. Yeah, I'm British.
But in terms of like politics, I think you can basically write whatever form of the politics spectrum you sit on. I think what matters most is the human aspects of those politics. You have to be very careful about the human aspect because sometimes, in our world, we have which side we sit on. Both sides of the political system have their goods and their bads. But I think when it comes to writing a story, you have to be able to at least respect both sides of the political spectrum because you never really know. Not everyone who's part of a political system is bad or anything. It's just, it's the system itself that can be corrupted. But in terms of writing politics, for me, I'm not really focusing so much on the politics of the world, but more so how the politics affect the characters themselves. For example, one of my stories, he's essentially a superhero, and he has to deal with the ramifications of being a superhero and, interfering with the affairs of, the law and, the morality system that comes into play. Because my hero, he sort of has a very different sort of mentality when it comes to certain things, like, for example, killing criminals. He has his own ideas of dishing out justice in his own way, and that sort of conflicts with the established police system that I have in the story. And it's more so fighting against, the ideals, because you can't have someone who has been trained to kill suddenly be judged for doing what he was trained to be. And there's just a lot of arguments and there's a lot of depth that I wanted to do with that. But in terms of the political parts, it's all about how you present them and how you write them. Because if you just come off as being, I'm going to write this character as being, clearly he is the Republican stereotype, he's white, he doesn't really like any other races, he's obviously he's an asshole and all that. But it's all about, am I allowed to cuss in this? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cuss.
I think you're pretty sure you can cuss, actually.
All right, well, I'm gonna censor myself.
I did say something.
It's okay. It's okay. I'll swear on your behalf. It is okay.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we can say slurs without being offensive, like racist or something like that. As long as you say simple slurs, it's fine.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
We have no rule against it. So.
Yeah.
Okay. I think in terms of politics, you just have to be careful with how you write them and how you write the people of that political background, because you're trying to tell the story, and we get where you're coming from, but you also have to be mindful of everyone who's going to be reading it. But yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, true. Yeah. Shall I go to? Okay, so with me, I don't really have I wouldn't say I have too much a problem with politics. It's more so that my focus when I'm writing is not I'm going to write a political scene. But when I really think about it, a lot of my main character's issue is a political issue, a really big political issue. But I'm just kind of focusing on how she sees it, and then when she interacts with that issue, kind of how the world kind of interacts back. So I guess one example I've been doing recently was they're trying to get to a certain place. So my main character, she got kidnapped and experimented on, like when she was young, and over them years she kind of became like, she was really optimistic. Actually, I haven't gone too much to the backstory, so I won't say too much. But like, she was a different person when she was young, but like that experience like really flipped her world upside down. And it's to the point where when you follow her, when you first follow her, she has no faith in like the hunter system. Like, there's a hunter system who like, there's like these, you know, people with powers and who go around, like who get hired to, you know, deal with like threats or help, you know, escort trade and that stuff. Like, there's people who basically, who are kind of seen as like protectors and heroes in a way. So, and but like, she's, because of her experience, she really doesn't like she really has like, I guess you could say, a bone to pick with a lot of them, because they kind of ignored like the issue of, you know, people being kidnapped, because over the years when they try to deal, a lot of people when they try to deal with it, all that ended up happening was either the people were never found, or the people who went to look for them never came back. And it became a point where it was like, well, it wasn't happening to too many people, so most of the people who saw this and were in them jobs just kind of ignored it. And so she's kind of had this like thing in her head where she doesn't do well with the, you know, the kind of people like the hunters and stuff. So there's a scene where like they're trying to get to a certain place because they found out like one of the big bads is, it's basically in a town, or it's believed they're in the town where one of the main characters like family lives. So it's gotten like, and they've kind of seen, because of the stuff they've seen over the years of what these people have done to villages and other places, they're like, oh crap, now this could not only happen to a village, it could happen to someone, you know, it could happen to like, it's more personal now. And they're trying to reach this place, but then all these like issues come up that kind of hinder them. And so they're in this village where like they're being kind of, they had to stop there for certain reasons. And like, in her mind, she just hell bent on trying to get to this place to make sure that her friend doesn't like end up having like suffering the same way she had. So her mind just hell bent on, I need to get there. We need to go. We need to sort this issue out and go right now. Like whatever. Like so she kind of, let's say, ignoring, but she hasn't really been paying too much attention on like what's really happening in this place. So she reaches basically reaches people who could probably do something like this issue, because you've been going everywhere and it's like nothing's really like coming off the ground. And like you tell in the chapter, you kind of get enough information from these people in the village that like the issue they have is actually pretty damn dire. You don't know everything, but you know it's pretty damn dire, and they have their, you know, they're kind of in dire straits. And then she comes bursting in, and she's just like trying to get what she wants, but then it wasn't working. And then it kind of evolves into an argument where they were trying to be reasonable and say, okay, we'll hold this off for now. And she just like, are you serious? And she basically kind of she kind of vents at them. Like, and it's because of, in our mind, it's for reasons which feel like, yeah, like, you know, this is how they all are. They're all the same like this. But in this case, she's wrong. So it's like, so yeah, when I think about it, it's like that is, when you think about it, that's really a pretty political issue. But I don't know where when I'm writing it, I never really think about it as that. So I think it's just more of how you approach it, and does it fit the story you're trying to tell. But yeah, essentially, yeah, I think that's what it is. But I think I was gonna say as well, like the way I started to think about like putting like how you deal with politics in stories, it's kind of like, I like to think of it a bit like medicine, I guess. Like there are really sweet medicine, there's really bitter medicine, and it kind of depends on do you, like, as a person, are you willing to do you prefer your bitter medicine, or would you take the sweet medicine sort of thing? Where what I mean by that is, it's like there are like stories where it has something political in there, but it's so embedded into the story itself. You don't really, unless you're really looking for it, or unless you're really like unless you're really looking for it, it's not gonna hit you in the face. And then there's ones where it's kind of like it's more direct and it's more upfront, and it then comes down to like it's either more upfront or it's more dealing with an issue that is really happening, like that's really close to stuff that is happening in society right now. I think sometimes the timing of when you deal with certain issues and stories can determine when people start thinking, oh, this is political. So I think I like to kind of think of it as medicine, whereas some of them are it's just so wrapped in the story itself, doesn't stand out, and then some of them are just kind of a bit more raw in the sense of it's more just like, hey, this is what we are and this is where we're going. If that makes sense. Yeah.
So my take on it is basically going to start with a question. First off, how do we define politics in a story? Like, how do we go about doing that? Like, do we have any specific definitions or patterns in particular that we can point to?
Oh, sorry, say that again.
Like, do we have any specific patterns or anything in specific that we can consider literal politics within stories? Like I don't necessarily mean like properties. I just mean like a general tell that you can normally point to.
So I'm gonna just say this right now. I'll just say this right now. Like, what is it? From my perspective, whenever I think of politics, I mainly think of like national politics, like politics between two nations and whatever stuff like that. Wars and stuff. That's what I'm thinking. Mainly when I think of politics.
Yeah. Well, especially in my stuff, most of politics is based around conflict. So that's I don't really pay attention to most others. Not that I'm deaf to them, but
no.
For the purpose of what I'm writing.
That's valid. No, that's valid. Trust me, that's valid.
Yeah.
I think about the reaction to the politics, if anything.
Well, yep. Good point. All right. So I'm gonna tell you how I feel about the conversation. I honestly feel a large part of it can be a bit of a smokescreen, and I'll tell you why I feel that way. You see, stories, no matter what they are always going to touch on some unhealth, on some really dark and ugly realities of the human spirit. But fundamentally speaking, that's not necessarily inherently political either. It doesn't have to be. Like, let's say, for example, you want to tell a story of a girl who's hiding from a nation state that's trying to kill her, right? Now, I've kind of done this intentionally, right? She's of darker skin, and she takes the form of a redhead. She's hiding out in the open. She's trying not to be killed. The thing is, if she appears in her normal state, which the Empire State recognizes her in, they will kill her. But as long as she's hiding as this redhead, no one knows it's her. She can just hide in there. Technically speaking, on my end, it's kind of an allegory for you wanting to stay quiet as a minority. You don't really want to raise your voice. You don't want to be too loud because you feel as though everyone is gonna swarm you for that. That's not inherently political. I don't believe it is. And the reason for that is simply because this is just a tale of somebody who's trying to survive. This is just the human spirit or the human experience coming into play. Now, yes, you could say that the human spirit or the human experience could also be entrenched in politics too, but I feel people sling the term around a little too carelessly because we seem to put the definition. I don't necessarily mean us here. We seem to sling that definition the moment a minority gets involved in the conversation. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that way either. I mean, yes, I'm kind of intentionally doing this. I am kind of drawing attention. Actually, no. I'm not really drawing attention to the fact that she is black within her own story. I'm not doing that. But if somebody wanted to make that interpretation, technically speaking, they really wouldn't be too far off from the allegory that I have in mind, because that is part of it. But it's not necessarily the front loading of it either. And even if it were the front load of it as well, honestly, I still wouldn't really consider it political. Now, as for what I consider to be political, it's more up to the line of what James mentioned, what Amos mentioned, and kind of what you mentioned as well, Nate. Like the thing is, as well as what Hex mentioned. Like the thing is, when you talk about like conflicts between nations, economic policy, fiscal policy, all of that, is very much within the realm of politics and economics. Fundamentally speaking, yes. I will never disagree with that. That is inherently political. But then that's when we start to run into this other problem. The moment of which politics do I not care about, or which politics am I just going to turn my brain off of? That's where I start to run into some conflict with some people on the subject. Because it's like, yes, I understand that how this story was written was absolute dog shit, like the one I mentioned earlier. I'm never gonna let that go. I am never gonna let that go for a minute. However, though, I don't necessarily define that one as politics per se. Instead, what I will call that, it's a fail story. I won't call it a fail story because it has bad politics or because it had politics in there. No, I'm just gonna call it a bad story because it is tone deaf as hell. Like, I feel one of the bigger issues in today's climate with saying, it's political, we're not really defining what we see as quote unquote political. And I understand everyone's terms vary depending on who you talk to, depending on what their experiences are. Like, that's another thing. But I feel the inherent subject, as far as maybe minorities in fiction, does not necessarily need to be fundamentally tied to politics, therefore it shits. Pardon my French. I don't think it needs to be that way. In fact, the reason why I don't think it needs to be that way is because I've seen plenty of stories and properties in the past, and even coming out now, that have managed to skirt around the subject quite well. Now, don't get me wrong, I know that for corporate interests nowadays, it's also done as a bit of a perk, so they can actually get more asses in seats or more watch time on Netflix. I'm not blind to that, but I think fundamentally, when it comes to people who want to write these stories, they already kind of have a lot going against them because of how the general perception is, and because since the term politics being flung at everything just winds up muddying the water for a lot of writers. Like, some of us might not even intend to write a quote-unquote political story, but do you know what ends up happening to those of us who do? We end up getting accused of injecting politics into a story when no, that's not what we're doing. I mean, the allegory that I mentioned to you before, it's not inherently political, but someone is going to make it that way. Someone will make it that way. And I feel it's our responsibility as writers that we are aware of the faults that can come with shoddy writing, but at the end of the day, we actually need to be able to point out what we can call politics versus what are we just calling a human story and a human experience. Because if we keep leaning towards all of that is political, yeah, that's gonna do more harm to writers and creators in general than help. At that point, it's like, keep your politics out of my stuff. Okay, sure, I get you, but define politics for a minute. Like, is it because you don't agree with do you not agree with the storytelling? Because if it's not the storytelling that you like, then we can talk about that all day. I got no problem with that. But it's like, is it because there is this person in there? And 9 times out of 10, I guarantee you, that's usually not the case either. It's not as though the person is bigoted by themselves. That's not what it is. That's rarely what it is. It depends on what circle of the net that you're on, mind you. But I guarantee you, it's not as though that person themselves has a bias on its own. That's not always the case. Sometimes it's just the fact that they're going along with what everybody else is saying, or in the worst case scenario, they've just been burned by a very shitty adaptation. Believe me, I've been there too. But I just don't think it's wise to really paint the general affair with that brush. I genuinely feel it's harmful. Not even just to the people who are being portrayed on screen. It's not even just to them, but it's gonna have blowback on people like you and me who are trying to get out there, you know? And I don't just mean that for color. I mean that for every creator on the planet. I mean that for everybody.
because it'll just limit us. Like everyone will be too busy looking at what skin pigments instead of the story itself, because everyone's just, I don't know, just being super sensitive to them things when you're not even looking at what the story is trying to say to begin with. So
exactly.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know. I think in my head is kind of the way I see it is like, one way I guess you can kind of help differentiate it. It's kind of, I think I might have said this for something else as well, but like if you feel like the story is more done and if it's as a lecture, then you can say, yeah, maybe this person, the ideas they have is cool, but maybe they need to work in a way to make it not feel like, make it feel like a story and less like a lecture. Because if I want to be lectured, I could go to school and get lectured about it. You need to kind of like, you need to get whatever idea you have, whatever political, whether it's intentional or not, and you need to dilute in a way, sweeten it up in a way, in the art of storytelling in a way where it's digestible to the person as a story, and then I think that everything else kind of works through that. So
I'll let Abbas go. Wait for a second.
So, in terms of the political side of the things, I usually like to see more of the like what Jason was saying, how race also matters in the political aspect of writing a story. But I think one of the things that I've seen far too many times, because I've been around more the comic book whole spectrum, when it comes to politics, and one of the things that I've always noticed when it comes to comic books, specifically like superhero comic books, there is always this push to be diverse. And I like the diversity. I really do. One of my favorite characters is Superman. And, recently they went with the idea of Superman being bisexual, like his son. And when I read that, I was like, I was ecstatic. I was happy to see that there was like this new sense of giving this new Superman and bringing him in with a new specific style that's different from the old one. But the problem with it is that there's such a focus on there's the focus of him being bisexual, but there's no real story aspect to it. And what I mean by that is, they just turned him bisexual just to turn him bisexual, and there's they plan to not really do anything else with it. And that's my issue when it comes to these stories that introduce people of color, race, gender identity, and sexual orientation. They just make it just to make it, and don't really try to do anything else with it. And that's my go on.
Because I love the idea myself. Hell, I parade the idea. But the thing is, I've just never been a fan of. I don't really want to call it tokenism outright, because Lord knows that term's been killed. I mean, especially since a certain person loves to keep calling Miles Morales a token. I try not to use the term myself nowadays, but I certainly agree on the topic, because representation is important, and God bless everyone who enjoyed the Superman run. God bless anyone who did, because quite frankly, if you liked it, that's not a problem. However, though, at the end of the day, what needs to be done in order to make sure that these characters can actually get the treatment that they deserve, not even just on the pages, but outside the pages, it's to make sure that they're still a person, and not just we are just doing this for brownie points.
Yeah,
ironically, despite the fact that I have given The Last of Us Part 2 a lot of crap for how it handled its story, I will give it props for this. I feel Lev is probably one of the best examples of an LGBTQ character in a story. There is no contest for me. Anytime The Last of Us Part 2 comes up, I will talk about how awful that story is any day of the week, but I will never tell you that Lev was not well done. I'll never tell you that. Because,
I love Lev.
The subject of Lev's transgender identity comes up in one moment where everyone is just dead naming the character. And when Lev tries to ask Abby about what Abby thinks, Abby just doesn't care. Abby is like, yeah? What's your point? It doesn't matter. You're you. Like, the thing is, your identity does matter, but at the end of the day, you're still a person beyond that identity. And anyone who tries to condemn you for it, or just tries to prop you up as nothing more than that, or you're some kind of abomination, it shouldn't matter. You're who you are at the end of the day. The representation, again, I believe in that. I write for that. But at the same time, though, we need to remember at the end of the day that we're still people. We're still human above all else, and that side of humanity needs to be emphasized as well. Everyone's sexuality, everyone's identity, all of the above is all a part of the human experience and the human spirit. And I feel that in order for us to ensure that we get the best story told for that, we need to make sure that that is still an aspect. Because unfortunately, when you do put a character that's nothing more than that, nothing more than their identity, it's just as bad as when it's just as bad when you have a character who's nothing, who's just like, hey man, look at me, I'm the straightest guy in the room. It's just as tone deaf and just as empty as that. It goes both ways in my experience. It goes both ways.
Just turns them flat. They just become they're becoming just that thing. They're just stereotypes. And any character stereotyped as anything is boring. So
that's what I would give Last of Us Part 2 props on representation. Like, honestly, they were like, as I agree with Kite. The story is very bad, but I will defend the characters and the acting. They were such good. It was such a good cast.
Yeah, the cast.
It was written so, like, especially the first half was just written so poorly that
exactly. It's just a crying shame. But at the end of the day, though, at the very least for The Last of Us Part 2, the concession I can give, I did enjoy Lev. And ironically enough, I know I will get torn to shreds for this, but I also appreciated Abby's role. I also appreciated it.
Yeah, I'll be torn for this, but Abby's part of the story was the best part of the entire game.
Yeah, it was.
Actually had a story.
Yeah,
and as much as I loved Ellie from the first game, it's still one of my favorite games of all time.
Mm-hmm.
By the time I was with Abby, I just realized how horrible Ellie's side of the story was, and then I was just so. And then when I was given control of Ellie again for the final boss, I was like, "Oh, I don't want to be her anymore. I want to play as Abby."
Yeah, I think it's because
and then for the final boss, I was like, "Oh, can I please play as Abby? I want to beat the hell out of it. I want to beat Ellie to death."
Yeah, I think it's because
Abby's is sad because I loved Ellie in the last game.
Yeah, I think it's because Abby's side of the story was just more focused on oh, I'm sorry.
I was just saying my rant's over.
No, Amos, could you you could speak and then we've got to wrap this up basically.
Okay, well, nah, it's fine. Because it was gonna be too long.
Well, can we give him a minute though? I'm curious. I want to hear.
I want to hear. I was gonna say that.
We need to know. The Last of Us Part 2 is a subject that we can all bang on about.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think with Abby, I think the reason why Abby's part was so interesting is because, Abby's about that action, Her story was all action oriented, whereas with Ellie's, it was a whole revenge story where you feel like, we're going through this whole thing trying to find these people. It's a little depressing here and there. Whereas with Abby, she's just kicking ass and just going through the entire motion of the story.
Yeah, and there's also more interesting things happening, because it had the scars and the walls, the conflict. As I mentioned, conflict, politics, and that was sort of the backbone of what was happening in the background, and that stuff was so interesting. And then Ellie, you just go through the overgrown Seattle, and you kill a bunch of people that you're supposed to
You don't really hate them on a personal level.
It's right. You to empathize with them, but I was when I get to them, I'd say, "Oh, you're dead. Oh, you're dead. Oh, you're dead." And then you play as Abby. Said, "Oh yeah, you die a few days later. Oh yeah, you're Vita girl. Oh, Oh, shame. Too bad I barely know you. And then, oh yeah, thanks,
Oh my god, I killed a baby!
I guess you're going to. Oh yeah, I guess I won't be seeing you again because you're gonna get brutally murdered by a pipe. It's just like I appreciate. I will always. I will say this. I have utmost respect for Druckmann and Naughty Dog because they really. Because I can tell they really tried.
Yeah.
We should probably
just.
It sounded like they put it backwards from
Mess
what I
at the end.
understand.
It's just failure and just execution and
Yeah.
as I always say, structure because the whole thing was a mess. The whole
yeah. I cannot disagree. Cannot disagree.
Final rant is all this sort of backlash against it when like it was the story was leaked. I would say to people who still think that, play the game and tell me
Exactly. Yeah, because like I feel like we can probably have an entire podcast dedicated to just how we all feel about TLU Part 2. I've always because I've always mentioned, I have a very hard time trying to convince anyone that The Last of Us Part 2 story was good. I mean, in theory it is, and I feel it's just let down fundamentally by its own structure and not even by its own ambitions. In fact, the problem with it, that's exactly the problem with it was the ambition and what they wound up doing.
Yeah.
Like, I feel it's a textbook study of what happens when you structure a story like that and then it just winds up failing. Like, no matter what ideas you might have for something, if you structure your story in a manner that just completely uproots its own themes or just completely ruins a lot of what's supposed to come along the way, yeah, you're going to doom it no matter what happens, and your characters are going to suffer because of it, i.e. Abby. If you ask me, the biggest victim of TLU Part 2, not necessarily because of the fan base alone, or just the anti-fans. It's not even just them. Abby is a victim of the writing of TLU Part 2, the biggest victim of it.
Yeah, that's a shame because I loved Abby. I still she won me over it, but
we can. I think we can continue talking about this. For now, I just want to end the podcast. Because we can continue. You guys can continue talking about this, but I do need to head out soon. But
no problem.
But I guess I will conclude. No, I just want to conclude. This is sort of unrelated. I'm gonna conclude it with here's a small take of mine. I think we can even expand upon this on the next podcast if we want. But I feel that sometimes it's more better to just write what you want rather than write to appeal to someone.
That's always been.
I think it's worse to live by, to be honest.
Yeah, because here I'm gonna be very honest. I will have in my own writing, I will have very minimal amount of LGBT characters. Not because I have anything against them, but because I feel personally that I will never be able to appeal to the people, to the LGBT community, the way I will write them, because I have not much of an interest or passion in telling a story related to that. I have more interest and passion in the characters themselves. I'll probably make a character LGBT, but I'll never focus on that LGBT aspect. I'll more focus on who they are as a person, a lot more. So if there ever is an LGBT character, I'll always keep it vague. I'll always keep it vague rather than put it in the focus. So that's my take. I always wanna. I think if I always think if I'm gonna write a if someone's gonna write the LGBT story, it's better off to let it be someone else rather than me, because I think they will do it better. Whoever who's more passionate about it will do it better execution than I would ever do it.
I got your back, Hex. I got your back. I got your back.
Yeah,
because listen, I have a fundamental rule for everything I write. Assume everyone is bisexual until stated otherwise.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do have more than a few gay characters running around in my books. But granted, I ensure that that their sexuality isn't the only thing to them. It is definitely a part of them. It's definitely a part of them, but it's not all there. It's not all there is to them. It's like you don't want a character's straightness to be all there is to the character either. Let's be honest, nobody wants that.
I
don't think. Yeah. Most.
I'm all about action. I'm all about action. I prefer speaking with fists.
Yeah, same. I agree.
But for me, I'm kind of more on the hex side of things. Me personally, I don't really have too much to like. I don't think I have anything too important for me to say in regards to the LGB. So, and I know I just focus on what we all have in common, which is the human experience. So
exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that's the most biggest takeaway, anyways, regardless whether whatever way you go. So
like no matter what side of the spectrum you're on, we're all people living on this big blue planet.
Yeah.
No point in alienating somebody just because they don't happen to like the same sex as you do. I just don't see the point of that.
Yeah.
I mean, and I just like relationships in general, so it just means that there's more for me to explore whenever I'm writing.
Yeah. All right, but I say this is a good way to like conclude, and we can. I'd love to talk more about like, like, should you write based on what you're passionate about, or should you write based on like if you want to send a message or something like that? I don't know. It would be an interesting.
Oh hell yeah! Let's do that next time. Come on.
Yeah. Well, I'll keep that as like a note or something, or something like that. Well, yeah. I say. We haven't even introduced ourselves, but we'll do it next time.
That's fine.
But I'll say like goodbye to anyone who has been watching and stuff. And
it's been a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, it's been good, man.
Thanks for putting up
all right. Pleasures.
Nonsense.
Yeah. All right. Bye-bye.
Okay.